I'm going to be attempting to make two Middle Eastern desserts that are very popular in this part of the world. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Castellin if you're new, and if you're not, welcome to another kitchen adventure. And in today's video, you know what they say, when you go to Rome, you do as the Romans do. Since I am in the Middle Eastern region, I'm going to be attempting to make two Middle Eastern desserts, halwa, whatever you'd like to call them, two Middle Eastern desserts that are very popular in this part of the world. This is my first time attempting this. I've been watching a few videos, and I also have this recipe book that I bought quite a while ago. I have used it for maybe 2 or 3 recipes only, but as you can see there's quite a lot of recipes inside here, and there's a whole section dedicated to Middle Eastern desserts in this book. I'm not very much into desserts, but I feel like it is the season, so I'm going to be attempting to make baklava and kunafa. When I tell you, I am completely nervous because I don't want to mess this up, but as well I want to try because I mean, what's the worst that could happen? If it doesn't work out, you'll never see this video. I'll just delete the files. The recipe that I have in this book calls for making the dough from scratch, but with all the nervousness I have about messing up this recipe, I was like, there's no way I'm going to try and make the dough from scratch. Sometimes things can just go left, so I'm actually going to be using pre-made dough. So this is Kunafa dough that I got from the supermarket, and this is the filo sheets for the baklava. Without rambling on too much, let us dive into the process. This is the dough that I'm going to be using. It's very easy to find in the supermarket. So this one are the filo sheets. This is what you use for the baklava. And then this is the kunafa dough. It kind of looks like vermicelli or rice noodles. So I'll be using this too. I put them on this kitchen towel because I took them out of the freezer and I've been letting them thaw for a while. Should let them thaw for about an hour or so. For the filling, I'm going to be using 2 types of nuts. I have here some pistachio and some hazelnut, and then I have some sugar, rose water and lemon. I'm going to be making the sugar syrup from scratch. That's why I have this, and I have a lot of butter there, but I have some extra butter in the fridge just in case this is not enough, because I've seen the recipe requires a lot of butter. And then finally, these are the 2 baking trays that I'm going to be using. So the round one I'm going to be using for the kunafa, and then the rectangular one I'm going to be using for the baklava. I prefer using this for the baklava so it will be easy to layer and as well as cutting into the pieces. And this for the kunafa, I don't know, it looks pretty, like it's supposed to have kunafa in it. First thing I'm going to make is the sugar syrup, which I'm going to use for both the baklava and the kunafa. To make the sugar syrup, I just use 2 cups of water and 2 cups of sugar. The ratio is 1:1, and since I needed sugar syrup for both desserts, I decided to do 2 cups of each. The recipe says to let the sugar dissolve in the water over medium heat, and let me tell you, this took forever. And then it also mentioned that you're not supposed to stir while the sugar is dissolving, and I was so tempted to stir it. I just let all the sugar dissolve and then brought it to a boil. I added 2 tablespoons of lemon. This acts as a preservative and also prevents it from solidifying. And then I added 2 tablespoons of rose water for the taste, and that was it for the sugar syrup. I let it simmer for a while longer, but I think I left it on for too long because the consistency was a bit thicker than I wanted, and the more it cooled down, the thicker it became. Next was to prepare the fillings. I started first with the pistachios. Now I had used my grinder to grind some spices that contained turmeric. That's why my container is stained, but I felt like this grinder was making the pistachios a bit too finer than I wanted. It was supposed to be a coarse texture. So for the hazelnuts, I ended up using the food processor, and I felt like the results were much better. I just pulsed it a couple of times and I got the coarse texture that I wanted. I am combining the pistachios and the hazelnut for the filling. Along with that goes a cup of sugar. Give that a good mix. Make sure all the ingredients are properly incorporated. And then the recipe mentioned to use a little bit of rose water, but it didn't mention exactly how much, so I decided to use 2 tablespoons of rose water. I have to be honest here, I was merging recipes from the cookbook as well as YouTube videos. When you have never made something before, just reading a recipe doesn't cut it. So I was taking tips and tricks from YouTube videos here and there to try and figure out how to put this baklava together, because just reading the recipe was not enough for me. Some things were just completely ununderstandable, and this is what the filling looks like with all the ingredients combined. And now it was time to assemble everything together. The filo sheets were quite large, so I just used my baking tray to approximate how much to cut off, and whatever was in excess I can repurpose for other recipes, because I believe the dough is just made from flour, water and salt, so you can repurpose that for making things like samosa and so on. So whatever was in excess I put in a Ziploc bag and put it back in the freezer, and then used the filo sheets that I had cut off. This recipe requires a lot of butter. Some recipes actually use clarified butter or even ghee. I melted down about 600 grams of butter. I'll be using the butter in the Kunafa recipe as well. So first, make sure that your baking tray is completely coated in butter, and then you can start layering the filo sheets. Spread a generous amount of butter between each layer. Some recipes online mention that you can pour the butter after layering the filo sheets, but I just wanted to make sure that I get it right. So this process on repeat until you get to about 14 layers. Now this number of layers was tricky for me because this I got from a YouTube recipe. I feel like you could have done with way less layers. Again, so many variations on this recipe depending on the region where it comes from. Some recipes actually call for folding the filling into the dough, but I felt like this layering process was the easiest for me. So once I was done with the base layers, I went ahead with my mixture of nuts and sugar and made a nice even layer of that. Make sure it's well packed in before you start proceeding with the other layers of the filo sheet. I also drizzled a little bit of butter into the filling and then started layering the filo sheets. Same process again with a generous amount of butter in between the layers until I had done 14 more layers. I find trying out such recipes to be so much fun because everything is so unfamiliar to me compared to what we eat back home. So this was quite an adventure for me. I had my fingers crossed the whole time that I don't mess it up, but it would be an absolute tragedy to travel outside of your village and not even try new things. I finished off the top layer with another generous amount of butter, grabbed a knife and scored the filo sheets into diamond shape, and after using like 3 different knives because it was so hard to cut through, this is what it ended up looking like. And now this was ready for my oven, which is preheated at 180 degrees. I ended up baking for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes this was the result. Straight out of the oven without letting it cool, I poured over the sugar syrup. I used about half of it and left the other half for the kunafa. I have to admit, I was getting a bit concerned about the amount of sugar, but sometimes you just have to enjoy something sweet, and this process was very satisfying for me. I finished it off by sprinkling some of the leftover pistachios, and that was it. The baklava was ready. Next was the kunafa. I used a combination of mozzarella and ricotta cheese for the filling. Authentic kunafa is made with nabulsi or akawi. I won't even be able to tell that type of cheese if I was looking straight at it. So I found some variations on the internet that said you could use mozzarella or ricotta. So I decided to use a combination of the two, and I started first by patting down the mozzarella cheese to remove as much water as possible, and then I chopped it into very fine pieces so it could be easy to mix with the ricotta and apply on the kunafa dough. Oops, guess who forgot to press record while mixing the cheeses? But this is what the combination looked like. This is the ricotta and the mozzarella. The recipe I was following for the kunafa dough said to put it in a food processor, which I felt was a bit much. So I just cut the dough in half and left one half to use another day. And then for the amount that I was going to use, I just took a sharp knife and shredded it to pieces. Although with how this kunafa turned out, I think the food processor idea was not a bad idea after all. I transferred the dough into a bowl and added a cup of butter. As you can see, butter is very important in these recipes. And then I just went in there with my hands to make sure that the butter coated each and every strand of that dough. Now to assemble the kunafa, first making sure that the tray base is fully coated in butter, and then I took about half of the kunafa dough that I had mixed with butter previously and applied that to the base, making sure that I covered the base evenly and packed that down. After that, I applied my mixture of mozzarella and ricotta cheese and spread that out as evenly as possible. To me, the kunafa recipe seemed so much simpler than the baklava recipe, but my kunafa did not end up looking anything like what was in the pictures that I was seeing online. I followed that up with the remaining half of the dough and packed that on evenly. I ended up using a spoon to try and make the top layer as even as possible, and then it was ready for the oven. And then my oven did that thing where it doesn't heat evenly. I was expecting a nice even brown layer on the top, but this is what we ended up with. I think I didn't pack on the top layer properly because it was a bit too crispy on the edges. So I just poured out the remaining sugar syrup, trying to cover up my sins. For the kunafa, the sugar syrup doesn't have to be poured on immediately out of the oven. It can be on the side while serving. Still trying to save the looks of my kunafa, I topped it up with the remaining pistachios, just trying to cover up the unevenness of the color. Many hours later, I'm looking disheveled, but the baklava turned out great. Actually, my husband already took a piece because he wanted to taste and he said it's good. For the kunafa, I hope that the pistachios I added on top are forgiving me, because I think my oven was just tired and said enough is enough of this baking stuff. It's a little bit crispy on the edges, but for the first time, please, I tried my best. Anyway, with that being said, thank you so much for watching this video all the way until the end. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you try any of these recipes, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.